Good afternoon. We're going to have a discussion about sustainability in healthcare. And I would like to start this discussion with a quote from the Singapore Ministry of Health, which said, a key priority of the Ministry of Health in Singapore is to keep the healthcare system sustainable and affordable for the current generations and the generations to come. From discussions with clients, I understand that sustainability is one of the key topics for healthcare, along with supply chains. A recent survey by Ben and MedTech showed that 70% of MedTech purchasers in Asia are concerned and have a plan to implement ESG. And this number goes up to 90% in Australia and in China. So I would like to ask you, what about Southeast Asia? And that's what I would like to discuss today. So what does sustainability mean for pharma companies, for healthcare companies in Southeast Asia? And so to discuss this topic, we have invited today Matthias Hong. Matthias is Head of Corporate Engagement at CDP. Jan Marsh. Jan is the COO, Chief Operating Officer at iFunds Pharma, also in Singapore. And Praveen Sam Thomas, who is Head of Healthcare and D Life Science for East Asia at Schneider Electric. So thank you, gentlemen, for being with me, because I've got a lot of questions to ask you today.
Thank you, Owen.
Sustainability is generally viewed as encompassing environmental, social, and governance objectives. So let's start with the environmental issues. Singapore has announced a net zero objective for 2050. What does it mean for manufacturing industries, and particularly for pharma and medical device manufacturers? So maybe Matthias, if you could address that.
Thank you, Owen. I think very quickly when we talk about net zero, and for CDP, we run the go-to environmental disclosure system of the world. Right, we are very much interested in the data. But what we are seeing from the data is, how does the world know that we are reaching net zero? How does Singapore know we're reaching net zero if we don't have that data? We don't have the emissions data, we don't have the environmental data of the companies that make up the economy. So we are very much championing what we call a whole of economy approach. Right, we want to cover all sectors. We want to cover all markets. We want to cover all sizes of companies, everyone from the listed companies all the way to the SME suppliers. And so when we talk about the manufacturing of course traditionally is one of the core pillars of every economy. Right, that holds a large amount of what we call high impact companies in the net zero space. Right, we need them to come on board. The healthcare industry, interestingly, is actually, I think, has a quite high carbon, quite high emissions intensity as well. So we do want that sector to decarbonize. We do have quite a number of what we call supply chain members, CDP supply chain members, who actually do a lot of value chain engagement around the world. We actually have 15 members in Asia Pacific. We actually still new to this region. The whole scope 3, the whole supply chain emissions sustainability drive. Right, it's still new. We only have 2 of those healthcare supply chain members in this region, but we think we need the sector, say from all the players, starting from manufacturing, but also the healthcare facilities, the healthcare service providers, the medtech suppliers. We need all of them to come on board and get their whole supply chains onto this net zero journey. And we think it can be done. In Singapore, we have the National University Health System. They represent some of the hospitals here, and they have already they are working with us on that supply chain emissions to get it accounted for, and then see what we can do to make it more green, to make it more sustainable.
And if we talk about the region as a whole, how would you say Singapore compares to other countries in ASEAN with respect to these regulations?
So it's very interesting. I mean, the sustainability reporting regulations, or what we call the disclosure regulations, is not new. But in recent years, then we see a little bit of countries coming forward with what we call mandatory disclosure requirements. And for example, Singapore went a bit ahead in the sense that instead of calling it broad sustainability reporting requirements, they say they wanted the listed companies to align with TCFD. Right, we know that TCFD has gone into what we call the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, their new what we call S1 and 2 disclosures, and we see good kind of alignment, and countries in the region all gearing towards ISSB as the central disclosure framework for the world. So we think that is good, and and we are also expecting some of the other countries. We see encouraging signs in Malaysia, Philippines. They seem to have announced at least an intention or some movement into mandatory disclosures. I think Malaysia announced it as well. And we are hoping the rest of the countries come on board. Right, that could be from a sector perspective, that could be from from a supply chain perspective. But any traction that we get helps what we're.
Okay, so the trend is clearly to move forward more disclosure, improved disclosure across the region, with Singapore being ahead of the game.
Yeah, and of course that gears. I mean, everybody has the net zero in 2050 in mind, right? It's an urgent. We are not, the carbon emissions last in the atmosphere for a while, right? So the earlier we cut emissions, actually, the better it is going down the road.
Right, of course. Jan, your company is listed on SGX, and as a listed company on SGX, do you have reporting requirements, and can you comment on these reporting requirements?
Okay, so Erwan, first, thank you for the invitation. Okay, so my background is more than 30 years in the pharma industry. So as a pharma company, we have an important role to play to deliver, safe, effective, good products to the satisfaction of our customers. When I say customers, I'm talking about doctors and patients, and with a commitment to carry out our activities with integrity and transparency. I think first it's very important because all pharma companies, they do operate this way. After, as a distributor in Singapore, listed since 2018 at SGX, of course, we do have the obligation to publish a sustainability report. So it's going to be for us our 5th report. Every quarter 2, we publish this report along with our annual reports. And in this sustainability report, actually, we explain what we are doing in terms of sustainability. So just to give you some example, of course, some important topics like packaging sustainability, like let's say responsible sourcing, or some environmental activities. For example, we do have a brand called Ocean Health. So as you can imagine, so we are engaged with a sea, so we do seabed and coastal cleanup with our employees several weekends during the year. And lastly, of course, partnering with local communities is, for example, what we are doing in Vietnam. In Vietnam, we are selling life-saving products, and we are trying to work very closely with HCP to save premature babies in provinces where actually the medical care is not good. So this kind of activity. So actually, we are trying to articulate our sustainability project within Hyphens Pharma around 4 main topics. One is environmental, social, digitalization, also very important because you have to protect, data, cybersecurity. This is very important, and also stakeholder engagement. That is also very important because, you need to get kind of engagement from your stakeholders. Your principal, your customers, and so forth. And for example, for us, but it's still very new. And I will be talking maybe later on the, if we have to compare with Europe. But Hyphens Pharma, we do have a sustainability committee, has been created 2 months ago. So it means that it's really the beginning of our journey. And
so the timing is just right for this panel.
So, yes.
Matthias, beyond the requirement for listed companies to report, which is mandatory for them, what are the other drivers that you can see that favor this kind of reporting on environmental topics?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about disclosure requirements, I think that's really what we call the base, right? That's the start of the journey that we invite the companies to come on board with us. There's so much that we can do, so much that companies can do beyond that, right? What CDP has done is, over the course of our 23-year journey, we have actually put in a lot of expertise and a lot of thinking into developing, our disclosure framework, so that when someone does disclosure, actually they realize they learn a lot. For example, when they come to disclosure, they're like, oh yes, we need a sustainability committee. We need, some people are saying like, oh yes, we need financial incentives for the committee, right? Not just let them, commit and get away with it, but push in financial incentives, push in, can we look at an internal carbon price? Is there pros versus an internal carbon price versus a shadow price? These dynamics. And when they do the questionnaire, they realize there's a whole world of sustainability out there, and then they realize there's so much they can do, right? And it gets very exciting, right? That they actually from what started out as a very innocent journey, like I need to meet the regulatory compliance. Hey, there's a lot that I can do for a world. I'm actually contributing to a better future for everybody. And the more they do, like one of the things that I mentioned earlier was our supply chain program, the value chain engagement program. That is what we call an ecosystem approach. That is leveraging one member that we work with. All right, it could be Jan here, and then he's bringing it to all the stakeholders that he work with, and making and multiplying the action down his supply chain. Talking to his customers beyond the B2B, even to the B2C, and you're going to have very exciting, change in the community, in the public that that I think is good for the world. It's good for us to tackle this climate crisis. So, I mean, that's just the tip of it, right? There are other aspects, right? Like, for example, like beyond emissions data, can we get the emissions data verified, right? So that there's less scrutiny, there's less kickback from people who, naysayers were saying that, that you are not doing enough, right? And who may actually dent the morale of your company doing more. There are things such as, can you, for example, can you look at the, can you look at SBTI and bring a science-based approach to what you're doing in sustainability, right? So these are elements that I think goes beyond the regulations. Regulations can only push so much, but when we see companies drag, the whole market, the whole sector with best practices, and that becomes the norm, that is paradigm shifts that we're seeing in the community.